All right. What's up, everybody? It's Nicholas Davenport here, aka Mr. Mental Muscle, and we're going to talk about anxiety today. Now, I call it the anxiety workout, but it's not an actual workout. Now, I do things with my business Mind Body One that integrates different methods that can help with forms of anxiety. We're going to get into exactly what that even means, but we'll go over what anxiety is, how it can affect you, different mechanisms, and different ways to train, whether it be mentally or physically, to get your mind right. So, y'all ready? Now, to start off with a disclaimer, I'm going to read this all the way through. This webinar is intended to describe the occurrence of anxiety and its symptoms from a general standpoint. It is not intended to be medical advice or diagnosis of any psychological disorders. If you need any kind of mental health treatment, please see a licensed practitioner. Now, there's a reason why I say that, because when people talk about anxiety, a lot of times they don't mean the disorder, they mean the occurrence of the state of anxiety, whether it be in a moment or over time. So that's why I put that disclaimer, because there is a level that becomes a psychological disorder. So if that's what you're dealing with, this can still help. Don't get me wrong, but this is not intended to be medical advice for that. All right. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now, types of anxiety. So the term, first and foremost, anxiety, it usually deals with worries, thoughts of unsureness, stress that is perceived of some type of event, action, occurrence. And this is like the general term. So this means everyone and anyone can deal with that. And that's what we're going to talk about more so. So if you ever had a situation where you felt like your body going into like chills or your heart beating through your chest, that's a form of anxiety. If you ever had thoughts of unsureness, you couldn't do something, that's a form of anxiety. You had a perception that it just couldn't happen the way you thought. Anxiety comes in many different forms. And these four right here are different broader umbrella terms that can see where you fall into, because like I said, there's different types and you may deal with different varieties of these types as well. So it's not like you only have one type. Usually they're interchangeable depending on what the scenario or situation is. So the first one, cognitive anxiety. So these are the apprehensions and thoughts that typically are worrisome and exhibit lack of confidence. And these are usually prior to an event, meaning beforehand. So when it says worrisome or lack of confidence, it's basically dealing with how you perceive something that's further out. So I teach part-time at a college. And for example, if I gave my students a test and said what's today, May 15th. So if I said the test was July 3rd, someone who has cognitive anxiety more so, they're going to be thinking all the if, ands, or buts until that point. What can go wrong? What can hinder them? Even seeing the actual day in their head and saying, I think that I'm not going to do well on this test, even though it's 2 months out. Plenty of time to study, plenty of time to figure out what you do know and work on those and your weaknesses as well as your strengths. But someone who's dealing with a lot of cognitive anxiety, it's their own mind. That's why things like CBT is very helpful, depending on what type of therapy or subscription a therapist subscribes to. This approach is good because it helps reframe these thoughts, because when it's cognitive anxiety, it's basically what's going on here. And definitely, as we all know, what it goes on here is going to go on with our behaviors. So someone who's dealing with cognitive anxiety, like I said, is typically a lack of confidence or belief or worrying for an event that is even yet to occur, and usually is a little bit distant in the future. Somatic anxiety. So this type involves physiological symptoms such as butterflies, sweatiness, muscle tension, and increased heart rate. So if you ever been nervous, because sometimes nervous gets thought of anxiety, and if you look at it as like tears, nervous will be lower, because being nervous is a part of life. It's not a bad thing. It's letting your sensory know that something is up. I'm gonna get into this a little more in further slides, but it's letting your body know, hey, something's going on. We need to get prepped for it. We talk about fight or flight or the stress response. That's what that is. But when you talk about somatic anxiety, is when it gets to the point where this hinders you from what you need to do. Because if you have butterflies, that uneasiness in your stomach, it's going to be hard to focus on the test or focus on the job interview or the sport, whatever it is. Talk about sweatiness. That's not very becoming. Muscle tension. Your neck is up here, right? That's not good. Or increased heart rate. We're going to talk about more about that with the next few slides. But that's all things that go into wear and tear of the actual physical being. And you can see how this can be detrimental to life and performance depending on what you do. Now, the next two are more so types of anxiety that deal with the longevity of the occurrence. So state and trait anxiety, and they kind of give away what they are. So state usually involves an adverse event and is usually a temporary reaction. So if I said that you had go into a work example, let's say you had a deadline on Friday, and let's say it's Thursday, or rephrase, say it's Monday, and you find out, whoops, I'm actually was mistaken. The deadline is not Friday; it's actually tonight at 11:59 p.m. So it needs to be done before midnight. So guess what happens? You go into panic mode because now your sensory is like, oh my God, I had a week, but now I only have 6 hours. It's 6 o'clock. I have to get this done. So that's relevant or relative to what's going on because that's in the moment. It's just that state. Like I said, state anxiety happens in that moment, and you're usually just reacting to something temporary because what happens after that event gone? Usually you're like, woo, now let's go get margaritas, turn up. But it's over. So you won't really worry about that unless this could probably be a good segue. You're someone who deals with trait anxiety. Now, this is a person who usually involves their personality traits, which are constant throughout lifespan. And I talk about personality on numerous webinars. I have one called the Personality and Performance, where I talk about this deeper, but just get into a little bit. Personality is pretty constant throughout life. Now, when we say life, let's say late teens, early adulthood, usually after that, we are who we are. Does it mean we can't change? Of course we can change. But what it means is, how are we more likely to react to certain scenarios based on our personality? If I'm a worrier, yeah, there's times I can be confident, of course. But more than likely, our default mode would be worry about a subject. So going to that previous example of the deadline, if I'm someone with high trait anxiety, after that deadline finished, we made it, when to get our margaritas, you're going to be at the bar taking a sip. But what if we messed up? Or what if our boss doesn't like it? Or what if the employer, whoever you send it to, doesn't like what you did? And then you get in your head, and now you're losing your mind over something that's already done, that you finished. And even though the state is done, that deadline passed, you're still worrying. So someone with trait anxiety, that's more embedded in them. And this is detrimental because a person like this, when you get into personality theory, they're dealing more so with things they're high on, such as neuroticism or emotionality. This personality trait is someone who reacts to stress with more less confidence and more worry, meaning if something doesn't go their way or something adverse happens, they're probably not going to be likely to get through it. And if they do get through it, they're gonna worry themselves to death to do it. So that's not going to elicit the best performance. So trait anxiety, they all play a role. Like, you've probably had times when you overthought something before it happened, cognitive anxiety. You probably had times in the moment, your heart was racing through your chest, like you had a hot date or a job interview, and you're just letting you know your body's ready for something. But what happens is, and when it gets over to the disorder territory, like I said in my last podcast last week, is intensity and frequency. How severe is it? Are you unable to leave your house because of this anxiety? Is it lasting for months at a time, years even? This differentiates between just going through the moment, going through the motion. So these different types of anxiety, like I said, they're not one size fits all, but also not limited to just one thing either. You could go through different forms, and these things play a role. Now, excuse me. So this is called anxiety workout. Now, the reason I call it workout, not necessarily, like I said, is going to be you doing workout, being anxious. Now, the title might seem weird like that, but I made it like that because workout doesn't necessarily have to be fitness or physical. It could just be a systematic approach or training to get better at something. So I use the exercise versus anxiety analogy or comparison because it's unique, not unique, but it's interesting to see how many people will say dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety, dealing with worries, exercise is a good way to deal with it. A lot of people don't know why. A lot of people say something like endorphins, things like that, feel good hormones, but there's a lot more to it. And I like to use this comparison because when we talk about just stress in general, anxiety isn't necessarily stress, is more so a symptom of stress. Just like exercise is more so a byproduct of a physical action, physical activity, right? So when we talk about stress, that's any change in homeostasis. That means something that makes you less than normal, or baseline, I should say, not normal. So let's say if you get scared, guess what? That's stress, because now you went from calm state to more aroused. And let's say you go work out, go from calm state to more aroused. And this is where the link comes in. Exercise and anxiety look a lot similar. So let's go through the list. On one side, you see the symptoms. On the other side, you see the what they fall under. So the first one, increased heart rate. When you exercise, what happens after a few minutes or even seconds, depending on how in shape you are, the heart rate increases. And the point of that is to distribute more blood to the working muscles so you can get through that workout, get pumped up, right? But with anxiety, the same thing happens. But do you know why? It's because while that stress response is going off, Exercise is going off because you're working out, but anxiety is going out because you're worrying. So when you worry and you get that anxiety feeling, your body's saying, hey, increase that heart rate so we get the blood to the muscles because they must be up to something. So they need that. Increase respiratory rate. Same thing. Exercise, yes. Anxiety, yes. They both have those traits. And the reason for exercise is when you want to distribute oxygen to the body so you can keep going. Because imagine a workout that you stop as soon as you got tired. No, your body is built with different energy systems, anaerobic, aerobic, for this case, to transport oxygen to the working muscles so you can keep going for the whole duration of your workout. So increase. But same thing with anxiety, increases. But that can be bad in this case because now you're panicking and it's not going to a beneficial state. Sweatiness, obviously, body temperature rises when you work out, then you sweat to cool you down. Same thing with anxiety, you might sweat because you're nervous. Increased blood pressure, it goes back to the same thing as heart rate and respiratory rate, is trying to get more blood and more action to the working muscles so you can continue whatever it is you're doing. And both exercise and anxiety look like that. And the last one, the constriction of the muscles, getting tight, getting tense, ready to go. For exercises, it makes sense because if you're about to jump, run, lift, you need to exert that force. But if you're having anxiety issues, that's just making you tense and you're just sitting there all day like this. You might be at a desk job and you're typing like this instead of being relaxed. And I catch myself doing it too. So I try to be mindful where my shoulders are. So keep that in mind. Now let's look at some things that differ though. So the first ones we said, anxiety and exercise are similar, but the next ones, this is where they kind of differ. So perception is typically positive. I put typically for a reason because I know some people hate working out. When I used to do standard fitness workouts back in the day, about 10 years ago, people would be like, I love training with you, Nick, but I hate working out. And they just loathed it. So it doesn't mean it is bad, but typically it's positive in perception, at least, right? Now, anxiety, I'll put typically, once again, negative, because the beauty is anxiety, once again, is getting you aroused. So depending on the severity, intensity, it may not be a bad thing, but it's typically negative. It's typically associated with things that are not beneficial to what you're trying to do. Physical response. So definitely it's beneficial in appropriate doses. And I made sure to put appropriate doses because exercise, you can say, oh, exercise is good, moving is good. Yes, but there's a diminishing return. If you heard of the law of diminishing return, economics just means sometimes doing more than needed can take away. For example, if I watered my grass and it got greener, good. But the logic would be more water, greener grass, right? Wrong, because they'll drown the grass and they'll die. Same thing with exercise. That's why I put appropriate doses. So if you do an hour of working out and you're getting good results, the logic would be just do 4 hours to get amazing results, but that's not how it works. You're going to break down more muscle tissue. You're going to get weaker. You're going to get more likely for sickness and your immune function is going to decrease and it's not going to be good. So that's why I put beneficial and appropriate doses. Now, physical response, anxiety is detrimental to your physical being because when you're in that fight or flight phase, you're going to be in that state longer than probably you need. Because typically when you're in a flight or fight response and you're stressed, it goes down once you get back to baseline. But people deal with anxiety, especially for longer terms, it's going to be flipping on that switch longer than it needs to be on. So that's going to have detrimental factors on your immune function, your physical function, and obviously your mental. And that's the next part. Exercise is beneficial to psychological response. And like I said, it's mostly because it puts you in a state where you associate health, you feel good physiologically, and it tends to make you feel good mentally, but it also mimics a lot of the perceived negative symptoms of anxiety and stress. So that's why exercise and stress and anxiety are so interrelated because it simulates the stress response, it simulates anxiety, but with a positive outcome. And that's why exercise is good for stress. Now, on the other hand, harmful to psychological response. Obviously, if you're always worrying, how much good thoughts can you have, right? You're going to be spending most of your time thinking about what can't be versus what could be, you know? So all in all, this is good because, like I said, the physiological response with exercise carries over because it simulates all these different responses that you get with anxiety, but it puts them in a more positive outlook and it has a positive association. So your brain now knows, wait, I'm breathing hard, I'm exercising, I'm moving, I'm sweating, my blood pressure's going up. Am I stressing? But if you're someone in shape, it's probably gonna say, oh, I must be exercising. And that's the beauty of tricking the brain. It's almost like a hack because if I'm like, oh my God, and I'm jumping around, but if I'm in shape, I'm athletic and I'm fit, my body's gonna be able to calm down a little more because it's accommodated and adapted to the physiological stressors. Now I can give time to the anxiety. It's not saying you're going to be cured. No, it's just saying that if I don't have to worry about my heart beating through my chest and my breathing, I can give more time to the actual mental stressor, right? Moving on. It's all in your head. So I got these listed down with ACC, fear itself, and the fake grade, but I'm gonna do them out of order. I'm gonna start with the fake grade. I brought this up because it's something I actually do in my class. So let me set the tone. So what I do is, right now I'm in my MB1 Studios lab and I have my stage lights up. But usually what I do is I turn off the lights with only the emergency lights on so it's darker. I make sure that everyone's there in class before I go over any direction so they'll know like what's going on, what's going on. And I'll say, take out a sheet of paper. So like 20 some students, right? They'll take out a sheet of paper like, what's going on? We have a pop quiz. So I say, you got 3 questions. All these questions you have seen already in the lesson, so there's no surprises. Each question is worth 10 points each. That's 30 points. And this will be weighted higher against your grade. So I set the tone already with it's dim light. They're nervous because they're like, what's going on? And then I just told them that the parameters of the test are extremely high stakes. So then after that, I said, also, you have 2 minutes to finish the quiz. So I start the clock, and it's ticking. And every 30 seconds or so, I give an increment, minute left. And then I'll be like, 30 seconds, 15 seconds. And you can hear some of them scream, oh my God. And they're ready to like quit. Some put the pen down automatically and just like, I don't know this, you know? And it's crazy because one, there's no life or death going on. And I'll get to why I bring it up. So after they finish, I tell them, nope, put the pens down, hand them in. I collect all of them. Then I turn on the lights and then I put up the answers. And I go over each one, explain it. And it's like, how many people think they got whatever? Like, yeah, I failed. So now they look at me like, is this gonna kill my grade? Now, if I was doing it for real, yes, it would have hurt them bad. But it's a fake grade. I don't really, I ball it up and throw it away. And the reason I do this is I usually do this on the chapter that we do on stress and anxiety. So I torture them a little bit. But most of them, the point I'm getting at is most of them come back down baseline and they're fine. But there's a few of them, the rest of the class, they're anxious. Oh my God. And some even ask, are you sure it wasn't a real test? Mind you, I'm the professor. I make the tests and the grades, but they're still like worrying. I even had one guy walk out the class, slam the door, and I had to run him down and bring him back in. True story. And when I told him it was fake, he started smiling like, dang, you got me. He always called me coach. I don't know why, but he was from a Marine guy, school dude. But anyway, so get to the point, it was no real stakes at hand. Because after that, during the lesson, I'll bring it back up and people say, well, maybe, because I always ask, is it a life or death? It isn't. It's like, but what if I get so depressed and I get so depressed I start drinking or commit suicide? And it's like, but the test didn't do that. And that's the thing we do. So this is where I'm coming full circle. Like we get like a lawyer at a court case, go somewhere with this counsel. So I'm going somewhere with this. We give power to things that really aren't that detrimental, because that test, even if you got a big fat 0 and it was real, guess what? You got more tests, you got more homework. Or if you fail the class, you can take it again. It sucks. Don't get me wrong. And that's why I think people mess up with anxiety and different worries. They get scared of it and they deal with it so badly because they think it's supposed to be a smooth sail. And guess what? That sets you up for failure because now you're just assuming nothing's going to go wrong. And that's where the cognitive anxiety gets in, because you're like, oh, it didn't go the way I thought. And now you're mad. And then guess what? It reiterates this thought process that if you don't get exactly how you wanted it, you messed up. And then if you do this, let's say you're 34 right now. You've done this for 34 years. That's going to be ingrained in you. We talk about state versus trait. You know, you're going to act more like this versus just be a test, because you probably do it at work. You probably do it with family. You probably do it with loved ones and romantic relationships. It probably carries over. So the fake grade is something I do to bring light to my students, at least, to see how they really kind of sometimes trip. But that comes down to this too, fear itself. That's why I use this one, because if you think about what we're really scared of, it's almost laughable. Because think about this. I know someone who's scared of roaches. And that's understandable. A lot of people are scared of roaches. If a roach crawled right now, they'll go, oh my God, it's a roach, oh, I would kill it and it'd be over. But they wouldn't do it because they're so scared of it. But this same person, I've driven a car with them, they hit like 100 miles per hour weaving through traffic. Now, I'll ask a simple, but maybe not so simple question. Roach, 100 miles per hour in rush hour traffic. Which one has the most likeliness? Not saying neither could kill you, but let's say which has the most likeliness to do serious or just any physical harm? Roach, very little, because I don't think roach, I could be wrong, but I don't think roaches are poisonous, at least the ones in Florida. I could be wrong though. But if they are, still less likely because they're so small, you can just kill them. But driving 100 miles per hour a $3,000 or 3,000 money on my mind, 3,000 pound vehicle, that's dangerous. But that's the crazy thing. We give these perceptions to these fears, which become these anxieties and worries. So it's like, are you really scared? Maybe, but you got to ask why. Really question it. I'm not saying you shouldn't be scared or worried, because sometimes anxiety is there. We have it for a reason, so it's not to dismiss it. But at the end of the day, you got to understand what's going on. Now, the part you're down with ACC, so I won't get too deep on this. That stands for anterior cingulate cortex. So this is the region of the brain in the frontal lobe, which is here. That's the most recent part of the brain, and humans have the largest one of all species. So that region is tied to emotional regulation. If you ever felt heartbroken or even just cried at the end of a movie, this is why, because it's the perception of pain. Because the perception of pain, along with the physical feeling of pain, are housed in that same ACC region. So it's like, if I felt someone punch me in the chest, the nociceptors, which is the pain sensory, because we talk about senses, people say there's only 5, 6 senses. There's like 14, and nociception is one of them, the sensory of pain. So nociceptors are the neurons that fire back up to relay the message from that hurt knee or that elbow, whatever, to tell your brain this hurts. But the thing is, perception is crazy. There's been studies where they had someone place their hand in front of another person who had a fake hand, and they would hit it with a hammer. But the sensory from the actual hand of the person would light up, and they would get nervous. It's because our brains anticipated, because that's where empathy and all that's housed too. So that's a different topic. But the point is, we perceive in this region. So from a neurological and a neurophysiological level, our perception of emotion and pain don't differ too much from physical. I had a fighter I work with. He does my stuff, and he tells me, I'd rather get punched in the face by a top-ranked UFC fighter than do this. And they like doing what they do with me, but it's just like saying, this worries them more. Why? Because that perception, that stress I put them in with my drills, it simulates the worry. It simulates the panic, the anxiety. And that's why we do it. We'll get more into that in another slide. So the ACC, like I said, is the region of the brain that's tied to emotional regulation, also with inhibition, which means responding to unwanted stimuli. And you can see why this is important with emotion, because if we get caught up in emotion and our inhibition control is off, that means everything that makes us feel some type of way is just going to make us react. And we don't always need that. Sometimes that's good, depending on the moment, but sometimes it's not. All right, so the anxiety workout, like I said, this is not a structured workout, at least yet. Maybe down the road, I'll make an actual workout and call it this. But these are just different things. So general cardio, and I'll go over each one. Strength and conditioning, mental skills, and brain training. Get your mind right. So general cardio. So it helps with heart health. That's pretty straightforward, right? Everyone knew that, right? So with heart health, the reason why I care about this, and I think you should too, we have millions of heartbeats per year. Now, if say your resting heart rate usually is around 75, 80 beats per minute, and you get in decent physical shape and it gets down to say 60, you just saved yourself 20 beats per minute in their 60 minutes in an hour, right? So, you're talking about 1,200 beats in 1 hour, multiplied by a day, you're talking about a lot of beats. So you actually, over the big picture, you're saving billions of heartbeats over your lifespan, billions. Now, the physical stress side of that is, if I'm physically stressed, that could also bleed over into my mental stress. So it goes both ways. The mental can go into the physical, and the physical can go over to the mental stress. Now, increased calorie expenditure. The reason this is important, because this really what I'm getting at is you lose weight, or you're a more manageable weight. And the reason that's important is you talk about our aesthetic look. Most people, when we talk about anxiety and worry, there's a whole field of anxiety called social physique anxiety. I studied this in my master's program for sports psychology, and it deals with how people perceive, follow me now, perceive the perception of others' perception of them. I know that's a lot, like inception, perception, reception. Do you get it? So it's them thinking, okay, let's say I go outside and I take my shirt off to go to the beach and I'm a swim trunks on. So social physique anxiety is me worrying that they think about how I look and they're judging me. So that's something we put on ourselves. Now, can you say don't care what people think? Sure. But let's be real. And that's a side note I'm going to make. I hate that term. I see all these pseudo mental health memes that try to preach like positivity, but they're really doing is making weaker people, because you preach this, oh, we shouldn't care what people think. That's a lie. like I just said, with that emotion regulation, when you feel that feeling of like, ouch, they said it about me, but you say, it doesn't matter what they think. There's a reason why your brain does that. Now, does it mean that you hang on to everything a person says about you, whether right or wrong, good or bad? No. But you have to take that consideration because it means something. And just like with real anxiety, then with fight or flight, with a stress response, there's probably something to deal with. So if you just say this, I don't care what people think, there might be something to deal with because maybe you do need to attend to certain things. But back to the main point. If you burn more calories, have a more healthy, manageable body weight, typically going to like the way you look. Obviously, we're always going to have some hangups, but this will help with that. And the other part helps with the formation of new neurons. So we talk a lot about endorphins, and that I feel that gets dragged through the mud so much, or not dragged through the mud, but upheld so much. But it's really more so with formation of new neurons, and why this is important. We get into the neuroscience of it. New neurons allow for new formation of memories, new connections, be able to learn and do different things. And when you think about it, when you think about anxiety, depression, worries, what do we need to do? Change our frame of thought. So if I have the same neuronal connections that I've had for the last 15, 20 years that put me into the, negative thinking, worries, doubt, fear, it's like saying, like I think Albert Einstein said it, you can't find a solution in the same environment where the problem came from. And that's where the neurons come from. So if I have new neurons, I can stimulate new memories, new thought patterns, new processes, and this can make me better. Doing this through exercise. Obviously, you still have to do the cognitive behavior aspect of it and change how you think. But if you have a new area to deal with, it makes it that much more efficient than it would if you just were just trying to do it off of what you've been doing. Yeah, it can work, but you want the path of least resistance, the PLR, that's what I call it, the path of least resistance. Strength and conditioning. This is a big one because once again, it improves muscular performance. So being able to lift things, function through everyday life. So I put quality of life and boost confidence. And it's coming back to aesthetic once again, because while doing cardio burns calories, you can develop something called metabolically obese normal weight. Now that's the PC way to say skinny fat. Now I say metabolically obese normal weight so you can know the real term, but people usually refer to it as skinny fat, which means your body is not heavy, but you have excess fat for a skinny body. And this is usually what happens when people do a lot of cardio and no resistance training or strength training. So that's why strength training is important when you talk about quality of a physique, because you want to be able to have that shape you want, because that doesn't come from running on a treadmill or doing spin class. That burns calories, so you can lose the fat layers, but to build the muscle and the shape, you have to lift weights or do resistance training. And when I say boost confidence, they can also come from, hey, I lifted this up. Look at me. Ooh, I opened this jar of pickles. Look at me. I'm simple, man. Like one time I had something I was building and it fell, and I quickly caught it with one hand and the other side fell and I caught it with the other hand. And it's like, that stuff is cool to me. Like it, like not saved my life, but I could have been in a dangerous situation because they're pretty heavy. But the fact is my strength allowed me to do that. Now that's maybe extreme. I'm not saying a tree falls on you in the woods and you can push it off. That's cool too. But it's these things to take into account. This helps with the overall well-being, because I think typically people are worried or anxious in a lot of situations when they're not confident. If you go to something like a hot topic like police shootings, if someone just automatically goes to their gun, it's because they're not confident doing this. It's just like that movie Friday. If y'all know, all we had with ease, Craig. You live to fight another day, and that's kind of the truth. I'm gonna do things I'm more comfortable with doing because I'm confident. Most people like to do things like, think about this. I used to be a high school and middle school teacher, and I heard this. Man, I suck at reading. Think or not suck at reading. I suck at math. And it's like, you hear that a lot, right? I used to say it myself when I was in school. I try not to anymore because I'm trying to have a better outlook. But when you say something like, I suck at math, it's saying like, do you suck at math or you're just not good at it because you don't really try it because you're not confident? Think about that. Like if this is you, whether it's reading, math, whatever, think about it. Do you really suck at it? Or do you just not try it enough because you're not confident in it? And it's a cycle. If I'm confident in it, I'm going to try it more. If I try it more, I get better at it. If I get better at it, I'm going to do it more. If I do it more, I'm going to get better. If I'm better, I'm going to be confident, because if I need to do it, I've tried it a lot. Follow me? So yeah, strength and conditioning. Okay, mental skills. So self-talk, locus of control, what happens in Vegas, and there's no more saber-toothed tiger. Now, I spelled Vegas wrong, excuse me. It's spelled Vagus, the one I'm talking about. But that is how you spell Las Vegas. But let's go through them. What are you saying to yourself? Watch what you say to me. Not me as in you, but you as in me as in you. This has been confusing, right? But y'all follow me, right? Okay. So self-talk. What are you saying to yourself? we can say upwards from 300 to 1,000 words to ourselves per minute. This is just general thoughts, thinking, everything that comes in our mind, right? Now, in 1 hour, you're talking about up to 18,000 words. In the course of a day, let's say you sleep 8 and up 16, that's about a million words. A million words. It's a lot. So, what are you saying? Because what you think initially becomes your behavior, and your behavior becomes your action becomes your habit, and your habit shows who you are and what you do in everyday life. So are these things not necessarily have to be overly positive, but are these things productive? I like to say, are you saying things that can add benefit to your well-being, add benefit to your performance in your life? It doesn't have to be like, oh, life is a bunch of rainbows and I never fail. That's kind of a lie. Life isn't a bunch of rainbows, and you're going to fail. And if you don't fail, that means you didn't try. And there's a rap group called Kids in the Hall had a song called 06 Infinity, and it said the only way to lose is to fail to try. And I love that line because it's the truth. Would you rather be 0-0, no losses, but no wins either, or 6-5, 5 losses, but I also have 6 wins? But anyway, what are you saying to yourself? Because you see, want to see how powerful thoughts are? So there's something called the white bear experiment. It came out, I think, in the early 80s at Harvard with a guy named Daniel Wegner. He was a psychologist, and he wanted to see how intrusive thoughts affect us. What do we really think about, and how do we get rid of them? So he found that getting rid of nagging thoughts is not that easy. What you think about can linger. So that's why it's so powerful what you say. So they had an experiment with white bear. So they sat down for 5 minutes on a chair, and there was a bell next to them. So they were supposed to verbalize their thoughts, meaning just say whatever came to mind, like, oh, I'm going to movies later, I might get some pizza with my girlfriend, yada, yada, yada. So for 5 minutes, anytime they thought about the white bear, ding, they would hit the bell. So they'd be like, yeah, I have to go get pizza. I'm just going to go home and watch TV, ding. Then after TV, I'm going to take a bath, ding. And however many times they thought about the bear, they were supposed to hit the bell. Now, the second part, they did the same thing, 5 minutes, verbalize their thoughts, but they were told, don't think about the white bear. Guess what happened? They started hitting the bell at the same or not more frequency than they were told they could think about it. Because how our thoughts invade our minds there's no way around it. So if you're saying things that's detrimental, you're going to follow suit with that. And even if you want to get it out your head, oh, don't say that. You're still saying it. So reframe the thought. You're going to say things that are more beneficial or productive versus not. Because like I say, you don't have to lie to yourself and say, you'll never have another problem in the world. You're the best, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best. You can say that, but I'm not advising you just to lie to yourself. Tell yourself something that makes sense. So instead of being like, let's use sport, for example, I'll never lose a game. That's not realistic. You can say something like, if I go to practice and emphasize insert skill here, I can give myself the best benefit not to lose the game. That's realistic because it doesn't sit in a finite standpoint. And I think that's the other reason why a lot of people have like issues with anxiety. They put everything in this black and white finite world when there's a lot of gray area. I always talk about the gray area. A lot of people don't live there. They either think it's one extreme or the other. One more thing with self-talk. I'll say another reason why it's so perceptual how you think and say things is because we have something called the RAS, the reticular activation system. Its main job is wakeful states. Like say talking about when you get sleepy, think about like a computer. When a computer doesn't get used for a while, what happens? It goes in sleep mode until you wake it up and press a key. So that's kind of how the RAS works. And that's one job. And that's the beauty of the brain. Almost every region of the brain, I guess why I'm good at the brain stuff and psychological stuff, because I'm like the brain. I have more than one function. Most regions have more than one function. So also what it does is focus. So it gives the wakeful sleep states, but focus. So imagine a flashlight in the dark. Wherever you point that flashlight, wherever that light is pointed is what you're going to see. Same thing of that with what you say and what you perceive and think. You're only going to really perceive what you're flashing that light on. So think about this. When you first got a new car, let's say you got a new Honda Civic. I have no plug for Honda. It's not a shill. They gave me no money. It's not paid advertisement. But imagine you got a Honda Civic. Now, before you got a Honda Civic, silver Honda Civic, you don't really think much of it. But now you got this Honda Civic, you see it everywhere. And I'm sure you probably had that happen with your car. Same thing. Because your RAS made it relative and relevant. Because if I'm not looking for it, why would I find it? So if I'm not saying things that exhibit productive behavior, why would I get it? Does it mean you can't win saying negative things? I'm sure you could. But I can guarantee you it's not going to help you, though. And that's a whole other argument itself. Locus of control. So this is dealing with what's in your control. So there's internal and external. So if it's internal, that means I directly have control of what I did, like what time I wake up, what clothes I put on, what I eat for breakfast, what job I choose. These are all internal. Now, external is more so things like there was traffic. Yeah, you can leave the house earlier. That's the beauty of the both sides. There's a spectrum. It's never all internal and it's never all external. So if I know traffic's horrible, I can say, hey, traffic just sucks. But if I know this, I can make it my duty to leave 30 minutes early or whatever it may be. So the importance of locus of control, where at least the anxiety and worry is, a lot of people put a lot of external locus on things that aren't really in their control. And they put a lot of internal locus on things that aren't in their control. So it's like both sides suck, because if I do something that had nothing to do with my control and I internalize it, I'm going to worry, I'm going to stress. But on the other hand, if I give external factors something that was in my control, I'm not going to necessarily stress or worry, but I'm never going to grow and get better, because now I'm just saying, hey, it didn't work because it wasn't my fault. So these are things to think about. There's no more saber-toothed tigers. So the reason I say this, I use this term so much in all my webinars, but I use it because I like to say this analogy, because in ancient times, the anxiety, the worry, that was a life or death saver. Stress response was meant to help us. Now, granted, since there's no more saber-toothed tigers, we don't need it as much, because now we stress, it's not about our next meal necessarily. It's not about will something jump out of bush and eat us. Because think about this. If I'm walking through the savannas 20,000 years ago, and there's a bush shaking about 20 feet from me, and I need to go that direction, I could say, worry. And I think, maybe it's just the wind. Da, 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 da. And then a saber-toothed tiger jumps out and it kills me. Guess what? I'm dead now. Now, let's say it shakes. It could be the wind. What if it's a saber-toothed tiger? Let's find an alternative route. And that's where anxiety comes in. It's an arousal level. We need a certain level, but the problem is a lot of times people go all the way to the other side. And that's where the problem occurs. Because if I have enough anxiety here, I know, be cautious, Nick. But if I go all the way over here, that means every time something stressful or something out of my control happens, I'm going full worry mode, negative mode, which it can save you, but what are you really going to get accomplished? So that's why I use that term, because a lot of those ancient mechanisms are still here today, psychologically and physically, and they keep us going, and they do come in handy, because if you see a real threat that's physically dangerous, you need to act in a way that keeps you alive. But if it's something like, okay, my girlfriend broke up with me, my boyfriend broke up with me, oh, will I do this? Will I go to the movies? Will I go to the club? These are things that don't physically hurt us. Now, emotionally, your girlfriend or boyfriend breaking up, which can hurt. That goes back to the ACC. Hope you're paying attention, because you're getting a quiz later. But it goes back to the ACC. You interpret that breakup as a physical. That's why it's like, I feel sick or I feel hurt, because your brain is interpreting it as such. You know what I'm saying? And that's built for us to survive. But since there's no more saber-toothed tigers, that mechanism can sometimes not hurt us, but be detrimental, because we can't really afford to spend a lot of time on that. But think about ancient times. Imagine if Unga Bunga Joe broke up with you and you spent time in the savannas of the ancient savannas worrying about that. You're going to be easy prey for other tribes, animals, whatever. But guess what? We couldn't worry about that, but now we can. And that gives us the benefit to do a lot of other things, because now we can be creative. We can use some of that worry and thought and turn it into something great. But back then, that didn't matter. Just staying alive, shouts out to the Bee Gees, mattered. And the last one, what happens in vagus? Like I said, that should have been VAGUS, so my fault. But the vagus nerve is a nerve that runs from your head to through your heart and to your diaphragm. And you do something called diaphragmatic breathing. Inhale, fill up your stomach, or diaphragm for be specific, and exhale. This triggers the vagus nerve to tell you calm down. So there's something called the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic is what gets us ready for war, that fight or flight. That's the fight, let's get it, let's go response. Get your heart rate, blood pumping, all that. The parasympathetic, thing like paradise, it gets you calm, back to regulation, baseline homeostasis. So when we do diaphragmatic breathing, it triggers that vagus nerve, and it physiologically tells you, turn that anxiety down. And like I said earlier, your body can't be physiologically and psychologically anxious at the same time. One has to go against another. So if I can calm down my physiological response, I can then calm down my psychological response. So these go hand in hand, because once I get that physiological down, I said that, I misspoke, I'm sorry. You can't be physiologically relaxed and anxious at the same time. That's what I meant to say, sorry. So like I can't be heart beating through my chest but at homeostasis at the same time. That doesn't work like that. You have to be one or the other. So like I said, there's a gray area in this. There really kind of isn't, in a sense, because when you do diaphragmatic breathing, it brings down to the parasympathetic heart rate or system. So your heart rate and breathing can go down. And then that's when you can work on the psychological. That's what I meant to say. And then you can worry about the thoughts. Because once that physiological response gets kicked down, you can deal with the psychological, which is a lot harder, as we all know. A lot of people can get in physical shape or physiological health better than their mental health. And the last one, we'll finish with this. Thank you for tuning in. Brain training. So my method, I call cognitive conditioning, which incorporates all of what we just went over. That's why I didn't put on here, because that's proprietary and I got people trying to steal from me. Ain't that right, Fernando? Yeah, I put that on this. But anyway, it's tasks that require a mental load, dual tasking, working memory, things that's going to put extra emphasis. So I'll put a few examples. So you see the first one is called the Stroop effect. Now, the Stroop effect was made by John Ridley Stroop back in the 1920s or 30s. And he wanted to see how people respond to stimuli that was inconsistent and see if they could resist the urge to call out the incorrect color based on what it said. So you see 3 different words. They're all red, but they're written in different inks. First one's a neutral stimuli, as in black. So that's typically what most words are written in. The second one is congruent stimuli, meaning red is written in red. And the third one is incongruent, is red written in green. So what usually happens with this task, back then they did it, now there's apps for it, but back then they had a list of words just like that were congruent and incongruent. You had to read through all of them and you would time how long it took. So if I was doing this, I had different words, different colors, some would match, some wouldn't. And to go and see how long it would take me. So someone who had a least or a faster or faster time, it would show that they didn't have as much trouble with the inhibition of wanting to say the word. Because typically your brain wants to read the word first, because we associate written language more congruently than we associate color. Color is more abstract, because if I was to ask you, describe red to me, you usually say something like apple, fire, but these are things that are visual. And if I was a blind person, I've never seen an apple, never seen fire, how would I know? But I don't have to know what a house looks like to get what I'm saying, understand what a house is. Like a blind person can get the gist of a house because they live in one, they understand that. But red will never make true sense unless they've actually seen the hues of it. So person who does higher in time or slower, they're typically having troubles with inhibition and impulse. So there's been studies seen with ADHD, autism, elderly and addiction populations, all that. And it gives you an idea of like where people fall from those populations and even the general population. And these are things you can do. Like I said, there's apps for it and whatnot. The second one is called the numerical Stroop. So same concept. So the first one, you see a 2, just the single numeral. So you would say that as 2. And the second set is 4 2s, which would be said as 4. Because most people want to say 8 because they think 2 times 2 times 2 or add them all up. So basically what it means is each numeral 2 stands for just one numeral. So you would say 4. So once again, it's your brain trying to overwrite what's typically stated and then go with what you need to say. Now, the importance of this, once again, I said this already, but forming new connections is good because now your brain can have a different framework to build on. Now, embarking on tasks that are mentally challenging, it evokes a stress response, but the beauty is it doesn't have the physiological ramifications, at least from the external physiological, like the peripheral nervous system. Definitely still has the fight or flight response, and that's the beauty of it. You can do this a lot longer. There's an app I use a lot called Soma MPT. Shouts out to them. They have a lot of different, there's over 60 or 70 that do different tasks to Stroop and many others. Now that is a plug, shameful. But anyway, or shameless, or both. But yeah, so doing these are great because now you can stress that ACC, the frontal lobe, but not tax the physical peripheral body, because you can only do so much physical training, right? But with this, you can always get your mind right. So I'm not sure how many are on right now. We got 4. If you have any